Yuanheng, written on the wall of the Jialing post station. Long flowing banners wind their way through mountains and rivers. A mountain post station, blurred by a misty rain. In Jialing, halfway to Chengdu, my hair is already turning white. The way west to the Shu Pass is much closer to the blue sky. Okay, so here we have a heptasyllabic quartrain by Wu Yuanheng, who lived from 758 to 815. Now, Wu Yuanheng is one of those very seldom encountered scholar officials in the poems that we've been reading before. That is to say, a scholar official who manages to reach the top of the ladder. He was a grand counselor, just like Chang Juwen or Zhang Jialing. So very successful in officialdom, and he mostly served under Emperor. Well, he served under different emperors, but mostly he served under Emperor Shenzong, who was the leader of the Yuanheng era restoration. At the time, this was after the Anlushan rebellion in the early years of the 9th century. Imperial power was recovering after the disaster. Big parts of China, but especially in the north and the northeast, had become independent states in all but name, ruled by the military commissioners, the Jiedushi. And little by little, in the decades following the Anlushan rebellion, imperial power strengthened little by little, started taking control of some territories that had been autonomous. But this trend really accelerates, as I said, during the reign of Emperor Shenzong, and Wu Yuanheng was one of his right-hand men in this regard. This obviously created many antipathies and hates towards Wu Yuanheng. In fact, he would die in a very dramatic way, being assassinated by murderers sent by one of these military commissioners. And, afterwards, his death would put into motion further machinery that would bring some territories, especially I think the area of Shandong, back into the imperial fold. In fact, when Emperor Shenzong died in 820, practically the whole of China had more or less gone back to some form of imperial control. So Wu Yuanheng, very successful scholar official. He came from a family of successful scholar officials. And, he served in different posts under different emperors during the very brief reign of, what was his name? Of Shunzong. He was exiled. Well, not exiled, demoted. And then when Shenzong a year later became emperor, he rose to the position of grand counselor, but after that he was appointed military commissioner of Jianan, Sichuan, that is in the old territory of Shu in the west. The poem we've read today, short quartrain, that is about his going to his post in the area of Shu, which, it was an important post, being a Jiedushi, a military commissioner, was one of the highest posts in the regional administration, but being sent away from the court and from a position as grand counselor was, a bit of an exile. So this is a poem whose subject matter is, it's descriptive. It's describing the landscape around a post station in the area of Shu. The poetic persona is Wu Yuanheng going to his post. It's also a poem of complaint, in a way. Like in this short poem, Shu is represented as this backward, faraway, dangerous region. So the poet is, in a way, in exile. Yeah, and becoming old. This is, a very common stereotypical trope of scholar officials serving in the provinces, becoming old and being far away from home. But it's a quatrain, it's very synthetic, so, all the information is pretty packed. Okay, let's take a look at the poem then, couplet by couplet. Just 2 couplets to analyze. Couplet 1. Long flowing banners wind their way through mountains and rivers. A mountain post station, blurred by misty rain. So the first couplet locates us, more or less. We are, the title tells us that this poem was written on the wall of the Jialing post station. It was pretty typical for scholar officials to write poems on the walls of inns and also of post stations. These post stations were government-sponsored places where civil servants could, change horses to continue on the route and stay for the night. So this is the Jialing post station, which was in Sichuan, about 120 miles east of Chengdu, the capital, towards which Yuanheng is traveling to take up that post as military commissioner. So long flowing banners wind their way. We can imagine that Wu Yuanheng, as the governor, would be traveling with a cortege, with soldiers and with banners. And these long flowing banners are winding their way through mountains and rivers. These mountains and rivers are, a synecdoche for the landscape, but probably they're meant to evocate the tough, difficult, mountainous, wild landscape of the area of Shu, especially the access to Shu, was through very high and very narrow mountain passes. So the long flowing banners, are representing the arduous journey through the roads and up and down the canyons of this cortege that is probably accompanying Wu Yuanheng. And the second line paints us a specific image, which is the place where we are traveling to right now, a mountain post station blurred by a misty rain. So a rain is falling, it forms a mist, and through the mist you can barely perceive that mountain post station where Wu Yuanheng is going to find respite for some brief time. Some interpretations would read also this blurred by the misty rain as maybe a symbol for the unclear future of the poetic persona, having been sent to a region that was relatively far from the capital and rife with unrest among the various peoples who lived there. Shu at this time, Shu had been incorporated into China pretty early on, at least since the kingdom of Qin in the Warring States period had conquered the tribes of Shu and Ba. But it still had a pretty strong indigenous population in some areas, especially in the rural places, and some rebellions and plots against the majority Han population. Okay, so second couplet. In Jialing, halfway to Chengdu, my hair is already turning white. The way west to the Shu Pass is much closer to the blue sky. So here in this place that we have arrived, halfway to Chengdu, we still have to go half of the way. The hair of the poet is turning white. He's getting old and he's living in exile. And the way west to the Shu Pass is much closer to the blue sky. This feels like a reference to the famous Li Bai poem that we encountered in the 300 Tang poems. The road to Shu is hard, with the famous line, the road to Shu is hard, harder than climbing up to the sky. So here the Shu Pass, the pass that leads into Shu, is closer to the blue sky than probably to the land. So, we're traveling through this harsh, historically famous mountainous area. And this is a hard place to travel through and a remote place at which to stay. So this is all Wu Yuanheng, not particularly famous as a poet. He's more famous as a political figure, as I said, as the ground councillor who got murdered and who was part of and who accelerated with his death the centralization and reinforcement of state power during the mid-Tang. His period in Shu seems also to have been pretty important for the development of literati culture in Sichuan in the early 9th century. And among other things, the famous female poet Xue Tiao, who lived and worked in Chengdu, wrote a poem, for example, connected and answering this poem by Wu Yuanheng.